Hello and welcome to this episode of Demystified as we explore home cooking in a modern world. Hello, I'm Linda and I'm here with my friend Paul. Hi Paul.
Hello Linda.
And we have a very special guest.
Very special.
We're very excited. Robert Castellani.
Robert Castellani.
How are you going?
Hello, Paul. How are you? Hi, Linda. How are you?
Thanks
Very
very
good,
much
thank
for
you.
coming along, Robert.
Pleasure.
Doing this little podcast. We did a as you well know, we interviewed one of my old colleagues, James,
Yes.
and that went down pretty well with our listening audience. And anytime we can get anyone into, so they don't have to listen to me and you, Linda. Let's be honest. Anytime we can get someone more interesting in, it's always value. So I will do my version of who you are,
Yes.
and then you can do the real version. So I would say that we're mates. We've been mates
Definitely.
for maybe 18 months now
That's exactly
since
right.
we met.
Yeah, since we
And
met.
Robert was known to me previously in my previous life working in
Industry,
kitchens
let's say
and
industry.
hospitality
If you
industry.
can call it an industry.
As chef from very famous for a long time, amongst other places, Donovan's restaurant, head chef of Donovan's,
Yes.
and Grossi,
No, it wasn't Grossi then, it was Florentino.
or okay, so Florentina, and a lot of very well-known
Yes.
adventures you've taken, but most notably head chef of Donovan's for how many years?
Oh, God, 15, Paul.
Yeah, and
God.
Donovan's, just for those listening outside of Victoria, Australia, Donovan's is could quite absolutely be put as an institution in the Melbourne dining scene. And Robert being the head chef there for that many years serves to show you that we're talking to someone that has some unbelievably good, outstanding experience and probably a few good stories to tell us, and certainly someone to listen to on the topic of cooking. So that's why we got him in.
Yeah.
But since then, I suppose one of the things, or how we met, was with working within appliances. And so our friend sitting here, Robert, is now the head chef, I would suppose.
Yeah.
Or, organises
The resident chef.
and
Title
amongst
things.
other things, for a big retailer chain called E&S Trading
That's right.
that specialise in sort of premium appliances. So he and I met through the world of steam ovens.
That's
And
right.
I taught you a few things and you taught me a
have.
heap more.
No, right.
So yeah, thanks for coming, mate. Much appreciated. So where do we start?
Well, we can start about appliances if you like.
Yeah, well, or we could start back to, maybe the Donovan's days, and or even post that, moving from there into. I think you worked in.
I was an administrator for a little bit.
Yeah, administrator, and now you're doing this. So how are you finding? I mean, it's been 18 months now. How are you finding working with appliances and customers face to face?
One of the shocks that you get from moving from
Back of house.
the back of house, yes, let's call it that, from the restaurant kitchen, where, well, even at Donovan's, at the time, we had 40 staff, so there was a lot of people involved. Now, the thing that I learned very early on in my career, which is long, is that restaurants and businesses survive with cooperation. So the head chef position, not only do you produce and make and hopefully make the business work, you've got to work with people. You've got to work with the front of house, the back of house. There's nothing like being an autocrat that you just won't survive. You won't survive anymore. Also, there's issues with staffing. Most of the restaurants are manned by young people. They're young people. They're looking for a career, looking for a job. So the position of head chef is that you've got to feed people, both mentally and also staff meal-wise. And I learned that very early on in my career, because I did work at Stephanie's restaurant back back
Oh,
in the
that's
80s.
right. Sorry, I forgot to mention that one.
Well,
It's a star-studded CV. That's the problem.
I worked there in the 80s for about 7 years, and I was as raw as anything, but I started working in the kitchen garden, picking herbs. That's where I started. Can you imagine how boring that was? But I would...
It's a bit more glamorous than my start was in the 90s,
Yeah.
washing dishes. So this is why you ended up where you ended up.
Well, I don't know.
Trying to sell my soul through a podcast.
No, I don't. But I learned a lot of things there as a young cook. Not only did I learn about the value of looking after and treating people nicely, but also to look after myself and to sort of back things off when things got very hectic. I think the thing is with cooks, you need to deal with a lot of frustration. And the best way for me to describe it is there's so many things coming at you all the time. There's the chef or the head chef. So from there on, I developed a liking for it. Somehow or other, it just stuck. I don't know. It's
a bit weird. It's a bit like
addictive.
It's a bit of a drug.
It is a drug.
Yeah.
And you know this too.
And then you get over it. And then you have this sort of 5-year come down.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But the restaurant is always world is it's exciting. It's exciting because there's there's always new things to learn. And you've got to enjoy what you do.
So given what you're doing now, which is quite different,
yeah.
and you don't have a brigade, and you don't have a team behind you, and you don't even have anyone washing up your dishes anymore.
No, it's all me.
I find sometimes, because we both work within the appliance industry, but I find not all the time, but every now and again I get an itch. I miss the rush of a dinner service. I miss having orders pour in and knowing I'm right on top of my game. Do you ever get that still?
I do, and then I slowly bring myself down to earth again, and I think, well, I think I can only say to you that because we did very well at Donovan's, and we had lots of accolades. But that's also the problem. So if people recognise you as a good restaurant, then these days with social media and with reviews and things like that, you always have to be on top of the game. There's no let up. There's really no let up. So the anxiety builds every time even a customer comes in, because who knows if the customer will be in a bad mood or be in a good mood, or just had a very bad experience somewhere else, and a lot of it is dependent on the front of house. So the back of house sort of produces the food, but a lot of the environment is set. A lot of the environment is set from the front of house. And I think one of the things that I learned at Donovan's is that you don't need to be a schmicko A-grade waiter. You have to be a really nice person and like people and be accommodating.
It's funny that you and I are both in this industry.
I was going to say.
Customer-facing.
I know. It's absolutely amazing. But even our industry now, it's all customer-based.
Robert, before I ask you my real question, I need to say that Donovan's is the place that my husband and I go to for my birthday most years, for quite a number of years. And my birthday's in September, and it's amazing how many other people in the restaurant are singing happy birthday. And my husband never sings because there's so many tables around with the constant sort of bombed Alaska coming out with the table singing happy birthday. It's just one huge party. And we've been doing that for many, many years.
How many times have you heard that story?
Lots, I imagine. But here you are, this great chef, and this history of chefing and what that means. And now you're in an appliance store talking to people who are looking for information, looking for inspiration, and all the things that people bring. It would be nearly impossible, I think, to bring a lot of those recipes to the fore. So you have to kind of gauge very quickly. Well, how do you do that? How do you assess the food that you're going to, that will best show off the appliances that you're trying to demonstrate, but also understand that the people sitting on the other side of the counter to you are coming to you with a plethora of questions and fears and, their own journey in this. One
of the things actually that I learned from Paul is you've got to give people what they want. They've got to. You've got to give people what they want. So if they've come to the demonstration for a look and see, yes, give them a look and see. Some people come to the demonstrations for recipes. And I remember seeing Paul in action because there'd be 10 or 15 minutes before he would start on his spiel, and he'd delve in and he'd ask people, what the hell are you doing here? What do you want? What do you want to know? What are you here for? Oh, this sort of stuff. So he'd gauge exactly what and how to give his demonstration. Where if people are just interested in recipes, you start talking about food in sort of in a recipe sort of format, and so he'd get people engaged. And I think that's the thing about talking to a small group of people who are interested in appliances, engagement, and giving people what they want. If they want to know that how the oven works, well, go that way rather than showing them out the sous vide function of the oven or the roasting function of the oven. So a lot of people aren't interested in a lot of the things that you can actually talk to them about.
And the only way you can find out is to ask them.
Absolutely. You've got to quantify all the time.
Do you have
move very quickly with that?
Well, do you have a combi steam oven or a steam oven at home in your kit?
No, I don't.
So when you first started working for ENS, you had to then look at this little oven and go, right, this isn't the commercial setting, this is the domestic setting. How long did it take you to figure out?
Thing is, Linda, a lot of these things that I had to tool up very quickly, because not only did I work with one particular group, I had to do other brands. So they said to me, we've got all these brands here, so learn and tool up very quickly, because you're the guy who's going to do the extra demonstrations for these brands. So, and once you start to learn all the technology behind it, but it's fantastic, and I learned very quickly, and Paul will attest to the fact that I ask a lot of questions. I go there, even though I've got this experience in the kitchen, yada yada, I'll ask Paul a lot of questions. I'll call him up and say, oh, Paul, by the way, because I like to ask questions. I badger people, I talk to people, and I talk to lots of different people, but that there is a skill. So one of the things that I know about the steam ovens particularly is that if anyone's ever used like the oven bags, and the oven bags, you put the chicken in the oven bag, you put a bit of water in it, you seal the oven bag, you put your vegetables in the oven bag. Well, that's a steam oven. That's what we're talking about. When I started making bread, because I started working in the pastry kitchen, I started making bread, and what we'd had this gungy old tray at the bottom with full of water. We'd get a brick, we'd heat the brick, we'd put that on the stove, get that brick very hot, and we'd put that in the gungy tray, and that would humidify the cabin. We'd have these little sprays, we'd put the sprays there. So all those things that we used to do, we're doing now, and the oven's taken care of it. We used to even put electric blankets on the table so as to get the bread to rise, because Melbourne temperature goes up and down. So what we want is consistency of temperature. With the ovens, particularly the steam ovens, is that they're very consistent. So you put your dough in, and within 40 minutes. And it's the same every day. Same every day.
It's one of the things we love about it, Robert.
Absolutely. And also keeping abreast of technology. Things change very quickly in the industry, in the appliance industry. There's ovens now that are bringing air fryers. So not only do you have your steam oven, you've got your roasting oven. Now there's an air fryer function in the oven. So there's how much more can you fit in?
And houses are getting smaller. There's no room to live in them anymore. It's all kitchen.
God.
Yeah, but to that point, the thing with all the functionality that's built in is I look at it, how much more can you fit in? And how much does that confuse a new customer? Because we know that, as a general rule, people aren't buying an oven every 2 years. So the technology between when you've purchased your ovens is probably 10 to 15 years. So the technology moves, as you know, almost yearly now. Like it changes very, very quickly. And so a lot of people are daunted by it, fazed by it, overwhelmed by it. While it's true that you can still get, and I mean, I've seen it firsthand myself, you get some of the best meals out of a really crappy old gas-powered oven that's got one temperature setting, which is flat out or nothing. And
we've all worked in kitchens with that oven.
But you get a feel for it, and you get, a touch for it, and you know how it behaves and how it works. But on the flip side of that, all this new functionality that's built in, I kind of look at it as though manufacturers are building that in for a specific purpose. So almost like, there's cruise control on your car just doesn't exist because it has a specific purpose. Although it takes up room within the engine bay and your instrument cluster and all the rest of it, like everything has a specific job. And I think while manufacturers, I think they're getting much better at applying heat, because we can't change cooking mediums that much. I mean, when we talk about an oven, it's a box that gets hot, right? I've said that to you how many times. But while we can't change that, we can change the behaviour of the heat. And maybe that suits better to X, Y, and Z that someone's cooking. So, people, and you and I can both attest, you get people that haven't bought an oven in 15 years and everything is now iPhone-type touch screen and like 19 million functions, and how do I navigate those? I think people are better off looking at them as not like, which function do I pick? It's applying a tool for a particular job. You can't, sometimes you need pliers, and sometimes you need a spanner, and sometimes you need a hammer. That's how I sort of look at it. While it's hard to demonstrate because you have to give tangible examples for every single function if you're demonstrating an oven. I think manufacturers that are building in this functionality are doing actually a pretty good job of like redefining the way that heat reacts with a particular food or food type or cooking type. Air frying, don't know.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm not there yet, buddy. Like, give me deep fryer, like.
Yeah.
But, I haven't tested a lot of it, so I don't know.
And this is why I think it's overwhelming for the general customer. Being a non-chef, I'm looking at it from a completely different point of view.
Yes.
And I'm coming along with my partner and their level. This is a big investment, and if you're looking at upgrading all of your kitchen appliances, because once it's like you painted one room in the house and all of a sudden you've got to paint the rest of the rooms, if you can upgrade all of your appliances at once, it's daunting and it's really expensive. And to be able to navigate through the options of the different gas versus induction, combi versus pyrolytic versus, you're sitting there and you're trying to be, I guess, navigate through whether this is a gimmick, whether it's going to work for you. And as I said in a previous podcast, with all the people that I know and all the people that have eaten at our house, not one of my friends has ever been convinced to buy a combi steam oven. Not one. And yet they've all commented on the food, particularly if it's been a recipe that I've got from our website and we've tested it in those early days. I've had families say to me, but this is like restaurant quality. Are you sure you made it? Yes, I did. I just did it in front of you. And yet they still don't see the benefit of buying one. And so I understand what it's like sitting on the other side of the bench looking at what you're offering. And that is a real skill to help us work out what we don't know, because we don't know what we don't know.
Yes. One of the things that I've noticed is that with ovens, they've got these assisted programs. Now, people seem to think the assisted programs is going to take over everything, and it's almost as if they're going to put a lump of coal in and it's going to come out a diamond in the end. But I think people are conned because it doesn't often work that way. It doesn't. The assisted programs are good to teach people how to cook, but it's variable. there are programs which they overcook or they undercook. It's an algorithm. I don't know, but
Well, this is the problem with cooking in general, because and I, as you know, have worked for a couple of different manufacturers. The problem is that you are trying to apply perfect engineered rhythms, a la time and temperature, within a cavity, right?
Yes.
But what isn't perfect is what you put in it.
Yeah.
A chicken is never the same.
Correct.
So no matter how often you do it, no matter how, even if you go and buy a size 14 chicken, the size 14 chicken you bought last week to the one that you buy this week, and maybe you tempered it more last week, or, who knows, but they're different. And that's why, like you say, I agree with you 100%, is assisted programs are a good way to have a look at the oven and see how it's behaving and what function maybe that manufacturer has suggested for that particular dish. But what they don't teach you is the technique of how to prep the bird, how to truss it, how to, maybe all of those little bits that I think you learn over a career in food. They're the little bits I think that maybe sometimes make a difference between something being good and something just that little bit better. But I don't know, I bow to the Jedi Master.
Interesting. It's interesting, but I've got this memory of years ago, and I walked into. We were having a party. We walked in, and people were talking about what they'd eaten for dinner, and I remember walking in, and people said, "Oh, yeah, Rob's a cook," and someone said, "Oh, Rob, what did you cook? What did you cook?" I said, "Oh, the kids were little, and." I said, I roasted a chook and had sort of roasted veggies and we had a salad. That's what we have to do. The woman says, I've never roasted a chicken before in my life. I said, really? Really? Never? And I just thought, well, yeah, that's... Because I think from our industry is, our industry is about... It's like, anyway, our industry is very diverse. There's lots of different sorts of people who aspire to cooking and what they want to cook, and then there's people that couldn't give a toss.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that all of those people will at some stage, and a mixture of them all together, will walk in and sit in front of you and expect some pretty high things at a limited time cooking demonstration, and they want, it's very hard. I spend a lot of time thinking about cooking demonstrations and doing this sort of work, the sort of work that you do, and thinking, are they a product demonstration? Are they an educational piece? Are they a recipe testing forum? Are they a commentary about, food trends in general? What actually are and what should they be? We've spoken about this at length. Like, that I find it incredibly difficult sometimes to maybe try and find the right in to get that customer to understand what I'm trying to say, because everyone's looking at it from their own personal experience perspective and maybe not the bigger, broader picture. I don't know. But it's a very, I don't envy you at all. I've done, as you know, I've been doing demonstrations for a long time now, but I'm generally working with one brand. And there you go. You just got to make me look bad, don't you?
No. Look, I'm no master at any of them. That's the thing. But I go along with it because I know the basic principles of how they work.
Well, because you know the basic principles of cooking too, and that's the other thing. And I think that's something that Linda and I have talked about too. If you understand some fundamentals, you're going to be a better cook. Like, just getting the fundamentals down, the appliance isn't going to teach you those fundamentals. It'll give you, hopefully, a better result, but maybe the fundamentals are the bit that's missing sometimes. Teaching someone how to truss a chicken. I mean, there's arguments to be had for doing it versus not doing it, or teaching them how to, why temper my food? Why bring it up to room temperature? Give them some reasoning behind it from experience. And I think that's probably one of the roles that you probably play in these demonstrations. It'd be a really good exercise to actually, record and get some feedback and see what people think a year later. Like, wouldn't you love to know? So you attended a demonstration.
Whether they've done anything that I've suggested.
Probably not. Yeah, but I mean, it's very hard to retain information. Like,
people forget.
People forget.
That's right.
I mean, that's why you can attest, we see them 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
No, wait a minute. Now, I've been that customer. My first VZUG demonstration, which is when I first saw down at Bologna Appliances, Dougie and I went along, and I can tell you what that lady prepared. So this is me dragging Dougie along into an appliance store to have a look at something that he'd never seen, no one had, and he wasn't really sure about. And she pulled out frozen spring rolls and put them in the oven. Yeah. Then she did salmon with some cauliflower and carrot, which were underdone when she served them up, so they were hard. Salmon was okay, but the veggies were quite hard. And then she did the Wiesel famous phyllo pastry with ice cream inside. I can remember that, and that would have been 7 years ago. So don't think that people who aren't sitting there watching you aren't taking it on board.
No, I'm not saying that at all.
No,
you remember what she cooked, but what functions did she use on the oven?
I have no idea.
My point is now
I don't think we've ever put spring rolls in the oven because that's not how we cook. But I can remember it because I was watching to see what it gave us, and it didn't convince my husband, that whole demonstration, and it was all electronic and it was a bit sort of, I've discussed this earlier, but when we went in again, we didn't have a demo. We just went in because I just had nagged Doug to death about getting one of these things. And we didn't have another demo after that. I just convinced him based on what I saw for the benefits were. So, I think people do take it on board.
I'm not saying that. No, it's certainly not suggesting that they don't take it on board. But my point was made by the fact that you went to a demonstration and the only thing about that product demonstration you remembered is the food.
Yes.
And the purpose of the demonstrator is to do what? 2 things. The purpose of the demonstrator is to A, cook some food that is tasty, delicious, well cooked, da-da-da-da. The second purpose of the demonstrator is to show the product and show the product in its best lights and make that as clear as possible. And you, this much longer, can still repeat verbatim what you ate, but you have no idea about what functionality that was used to get to that point. Whether it was good, bad, or let's say it was fantastic.
But I did think it was pretty amazing that you could crisp phyllo pastry and yet still have frozen ice cream.
But we've discussed this.
I know we have. Yeah. But so Robert, with what you're anyway, we'll just move on from that one. So, but Robert, with you now doing your demonstration on a whole range of appliances at ENS training, do you have a sort of a set menu that you think best showcases how many appliances you have to get through? That gives you the time, because I know I've seen Paul do this since he started doing demos, but that muscle memory you have to be able to prepare what you're doing and present to people and answer questions and ask questions and also think about what you have to, still do the next step for the cooking process. So do you have a set menu, or do you...
I change the menus, and it's a pain because I really have to be on the ball. So for some brands, I'll demonstrate how to make pizza. For some brands, I'll make a cream caramel, something like that.
Well, why do you change it? Why do you do that?
For my own interest, really, but also because the oven particularly works well. I've spoken to Paul about some of the ovens that are irregular. The temperatures are irregular, and I've found them in the particular stores. Some of them have got the temperature is not 100%. I'm willing to say that. And also, look, Linda, I've actually had some fails too. Sometimes things don't work out as what you'd like them to do. Sometimes things are a little bit overcooked. People don't say anything, but I know they know. But some brands I use the dehydrator, so I've dehydrated food, 2 or 3 days before, and what I try and do is um, it's a bit um, it's a bit of a banquet in a way. You've got lots of different things, and a smorgasbord, so people can actually pick out what they want. So I'll say, oh well, I can do dehydrating, or in this oven, and this is the setting, and whether or not you want to do that, it's fine. But also, this oven has the assisted function, but it's also got the steam function, where you can steam and then you can roast straight away, and then you can put the grill on straight away after that. And people think, oh yeah, this is a really good idea, so they'll take that. But some people maybe not be interested in that function. So you try and give people as much information as not specific, but you try and give people as much information as what the oven can do for the limited time that you've got.
What do you think who are attending? Is there a general theme? I know Paul said that it's and you've mentioned that trying to ascertain what they're there for.
Yeah.
But would you say there are one or two types of people that go along, or?
Yeah, there's an interest in food. There's an overall interest in food and what you can cook in the oven. There are some people who want recipes, yes, but there is also some people that just go into the store and say, well, I want that one because that's the best, that sort of stuff. And then there's people that are like the weekend cooks. They're like experimenting, and they're sous videing, and they're dehydrating, and oh yes, I dehydrated some olives on the weekend. Great, that sort of stuff. So there's a range of different people. There's a.
And when you get them all in one space together,
it's
trying to address questions that are specific to what their interests are, but still make it interesting for the remainder of the audience, and bring that back to exactly what you are cooking on the day. Because maybe you get someone that's interested in dehydrating, and maybe you haven't done that for that particular demonstration, and the other 6 or 8 people sitting there don't want to hear about it, but that particular person does. How do you... the skill is to be able to answer that question, make it interesting for everyone else, relate it back to what you're actually doing right now and the brand.
Yeah. What I do, I know that you've got your own, but what I do, I will relate it to an experience that I had.
Yeah.
So I'll say, well, yes, you can dehydrate your oranges and your lemons, but to take it a step further, what I've done in the past, I've taken the roe from the scallops, and I've dehydrated the roe from the scallops. Then I put them into the Thermomix, and people go, oh yeah, I've got a Thermomix. And I put them into the Thermomix, and I've added powdered ginger, and then from the powdered ginger and the scallop powder, I've used the seasoning, and it's fantastic for crayfish, or you can finish it off with a sauce if you really want.
Is this what you do at home, is it?
Yes. Yes.
Sitting there with your scallop roe dusted crayfish.
But see, that's the problem.
Well, we know who's picked the better job, don't we?
You can't get scallop roe anymore.
No, I know,
it's
you can't.
gone to China.
Yeah.
It's gone to China.
What do you think after this pandemic that we've been the whole world's been going through, and the difficulty it is conducting face-to-face demonstrations of appliances, do you think there's a way of do you think people will be happy to forgo the food for an educational process on oven, cooktops, appliances in general?
Well, there's a huge demand for knowledge in our industry, and we're professional cooks, so we've got knowledge, length and breadth, and we can talk the leg off the table about cooking, but as to how people engage with that information, that's another thing. I mean, also in our industry, if you call it an industry, Paul.
Well, it is.
It is, but you've got long-standing qualified, cooks, but then you've got, people that have done like this cockamamie degree, which...
Oh, look out. He's on the
No.
warpath.
No, but, you know, it's different. It's difficult.
And what do you think the next? Do you think there's a trend happening or emerging in appliances that you're seeing, or is it really just this constant, as Paul was saying, is every year there's a new feature, a new function, and it's just another sort of
Gimmick, gizmo.
Yeah.
I like the idea of the internet being...
It's not a new thing, mate.
I like the
How do you
idea...
think everyone's listening to you right now?
I like the idea of the internet and the appliance together. So you can actually verbalise a command and say to the appliance, switch on. I can foresee that what will happen is that maybe the appliance can
say no.
Say no. But I've heard people that have got these Alexas at home.
Connected
To the ovens and also to their lights and also to the car door. And they'll come in and say, and they've named all the appliances by the names. So they'll walk in and say, oh, turn Bob on. And then Alexa would say, oh, sorry, I did not understand what you were saying. Turn Bob on.
I wonder how far this goes, because one of our beautiful friends, they have a Google, and you can sit there and they can say, hey, party trick, music on, music off, lights up, lights down. But I just wonder how far we're moving. Most of us are, while we're quick adopters of some technologies, and certainly in Australia we're quick adopters of phones and things like that, I think that other take-up of getting out, I just wonder how long it'll be before there's a mass take-up of our fridge talking to our oven, talking to our phone to give us a shopping list that we can do online and have it delivered to our home. Yeah. I think people still like feeling, and if one thing the pandemic's taught us, the things that we can take control on, we like taking control on. And for most people, that would be the food that they're feeding their family, I would say. So I just wonder, but interesting. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for that, Robert.
Pleasure.
And
thanks, buddy.
Thanks for coming in. And,
awesome to see you. Thanks for coming in. I'm being serious. Really appreciate it.
And taking the pressure off Paul.
I love him.
Well, we'll talk about that later, Robert. So thanks very much, guys.
Pleasure.
Bye.
See ya.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this podcast as we explore home cooking in a modern world. We'd love you to subscribe, and for more information, please go to our website, cookingwithsteam.com.